Be me, Ian, just a normal guy trying to get by. I work a 9 to 5 job that pays the bills. It's not glamorous. I stare at spreadsheets until my eyes glaze over. I drink mediocre office coffee, and I count down the minutes until I can go home and do literally anything else. It's the corporate equivalent of vanilla ice cream. Not exciting, but stable. For years, the office was my quiet place. Not in a good way, more in a everyone minds their own business kind of way. Our department was a small, well-oiled machine. We had our roles, we did our work, and we went home. The unspoken rule was simple. Don't be an idiot, do your job, and don't make things difficult for anyone else. Our manager was this old guy, practically a relic from a bygone era of business. Let's call him Mr. Henderson. His management style consisted of 2 questions. Is the work done, and are there any problems? If the answer to the first was yes and the second was no, he'd nod and shuffle back to his office to read the newspaper online. It was perfect. A low-stress environment where competence was all that mattered. The closest thing I had to a work friend was Raymond. Raymond was our IT guy, a true wizard. He lived in the server room, a chilly, humming cave he called the sanctuary. He was a cynical, sarcastic dude who had seen every kind of corporate nonsense and survived. He was fueled by a steady diet of energy drinks and the quiet suffering of his coworkers who couldn't figure out how to turn their monitors on. Going to him with a problem was a ritual. You'd enter the sanctuary, state your issue, and he'd sigh like you just asked him to solve world hunger. Then he'd type 3 commands and fix everything in 10 seconds. A true genius. Then there was Sarah, our lead graphic designer. She was incredibly quiet but produced amazing work. She'd come to work, put on her massive headphones, and enter a state of pure creative flow for 8 hours straight. Her interactions were minimal and to the point. Need the logo in blue? Okay. And an hour later, you'd have a perfect blue logo. We all coexisted peacefully. The office suck-up would try to impress people. The social butterfly would organize after-work drinks that most of us ignored. And the rest of us just kept our heads down. The ecosystem was balanced. Then, the email arrived. Mr. Henderson was retiring. After 40 years with the company, he was finally hanging it up. Good for him. The corporate email announcing his departure was followed by another, introducing our new manager. Her name was Heather. The email was a masterpiece of corporate buzzwords. It praised her dynamic leadership, her forward-thinking approach to workplace culture, and her passion for fostering inclusive and synergistic environments. I read that sentence and felt a cold dread creep up my spine. Raymond sent me a message on the internal chat. R.I.P. us. I knew he was right. Heather arrived a week later. She had that specific look of someone who believes their job is not to manage a team, but to enlighten the peasants. She had a haircut you could set a level on and wore sharp, uncomfortable-looking business attire. She walked in on her first day like she was liberating a third-world country. The first team meeting was a sign of things to come. We all gathered in the conference room. Mr. Henderson's meetings used to last 10 minutes. Here's what we need to do. Any questions? No? Good. Get to it. Heather's first meeting lasted 2 hours. We didn't talk about a single work-related project. Instead, we did icebreakers. We had to go around the room and state our name, our role, and a personal truth. When it was Raymond's turn, he just said, "Raymond, it. I believe that entropy will eventually win and all of this is meaningless." Heather gave a tight, forced smile and quickly moved on. She then unveiled her grand vision for the department. She talked for an hour straight about reevaluating our core principles, breaking down old hierarchical structures, and creating a safe space for vulnerability. I just wanted to go back to my desk and finish a report that was due by 3 p.m. The next few weeks were a slow-motion descent into corporate hell. First, she rearranged the entire office layout. She got rid of our cubicles, which she called isolating boxes of conformity. She replaced them with a massive open-plan layout with hot desks. No one had an assigned seat. You just had to find an empty spot every morning. It was supposed to encourage collaboration. In reality, it just meant you could hear every single phone call, every cough, and every painfully loud keystroke from the guy who types with only his index fingers. Productivity plummeted. Sarah couldn't concentrate with all the noise. Raymond barricaded himself in his server room and refused to come out unless it was a level 1 emergency. Then came the mandatory weekly workshops. Every Friday afternoon, for 2 hours, we had to attend a session on some new corporate doctrine. The first one was on unconscious bias. Heather showed us a slideshow that basically accused us all of being secretly terrible people without even knowing it. Another was on effective allyship. We had to role-play scenarios where we called out problematic behavior. The office suck-up, a guy named Tim, absolutely loved it. He was a master of performative agreement, nodding at everything Heather said and asking leading questions like, "That's a brilliant point, Heather. How can we, as men, do more to check our privilege in the break room?" It was nauseating. The actual work started to suffer. Deadlines were being missed. Clients were getting antsy. But whenever anyone brought up a project-related issue, Heather would steer the conversation back to her cultural crusade. Yes, the client is unhappy, but what's more important is that we address the systemic issues that led to this communication breakdown. Let's circle back and unpack our internal biases first. One day, I made a fatal mistake. In the team chat, I needed to ask a question to a group of 3 colleagues, 2 guys and a girl. I typed, "Hey guys, does anyone have the latest figures for the Q3 report?" A few seconds later, I got a private message from Heather. "Ian, my office, now." I walked over, confused. I thought maybe I'd made a mistake on a report. I sat down. She stared at me from across her desk, her expression one of profound disappointment. She told me that my use of the word guys was exclusionary and a form of microaggression. She explained that it contributed to a workplace culture that sidelines non-male identifying individuals. I just sat there, my brain struggling to process the sheer absurdity of the situation. I was being formally reprimanded for a greeting I've used my entire life without a single person ever having a problem with it. She made me verbally agree that I would be more mindful of my language in the future. I walked out of her office feeling like I'd just been lectured by a high school principal. That was the moment my passive annoyance turned into genuine resentment. This wasn't about making a better workplace. This was about power. It was about her imposing her rigid, humorless ideology on all of us. The atmosphere in the office grew colder and more paranoid. People stopped talking to each other for fear of saying the wrong thing. Emails became sterile and formal. The easy camaraderie we once had was completely gone, replaced by a tense, awkward silence. We were all just walking on eggshells, trying to survive until 5 p.m. I thought things couldn't get any worse. I was wrong. One morning, we all received a calendar invite for a mandatory department-wide policy announcement. The meeting was in an hour. No other details were provided. A sense of dread filled the open plan office. We all knew this was going to be bad. We filed into the conference room. Heather was standing at the front, next to a whiteboard. She had a look of grim determination on her face, like a general about to send her troops into battle. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "I've been observing our department's culture for the past few months, and while we've made some progress, there is still much work to be done." Oh boy, here we go. She talked about the importance of identity and recognition. She said that to truly be an inclusive space, we needed to go beyond just avoiding harmful language. We needed to proactively affirm each other's identities. And then she dropped the bomb. Effective immediately, it is now company policy for this department that all employees must display their personal pronouns in their email signatures and all internal communication profiles. The room was utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the industrial-grade carpeting. She continued, her voice rising with evangelical fervor. "This will eliminate any ambiguity and prevent the painful experience of being misgendered. This is a crucial step toward building a workplace of true psychological safety." She turned to the whiteboard and wrote down examples. John Doe, he/him. Jane Smith, she/her. Alex Ray, they/them. She then said the words that sealed her fate. "This is not optional. This is a mandatory requirement. Refusal to comply will be noted in your performance reviews and may result in disciplinary action. We expect everyone to have their profiles updated by the end of the day. An email with detailed instructions will be sent out shortly." She looked around the room, expecting applause or at least nods of agreement. All she got were blank, soul-crushing stares, except, of course, from Tim the suck-up. "Heather, this is such a brave and necessary step," he gushed. "Thank you for being a true leader." She gave him a grateful smile. The rest of us just sat there, stunned. This was it, the final straw. It wasn't about the pronouns themselves, it was about being forced. It was the authoritarian mandate, the threat of punishment for not conforming to her specific worldview. She was turning our workplace into a re-education camp, and our email signatures were to be our public declarations of loyalty. The meeting ended. We shuffled back to our desks in a daze. A moment later, the promised email arrived. It was long and filled with condescending explanations of what pronouns are, why they're important, and a step-by-step guide on how to update our profiles. It reiterated the threat. Compliance was mandatory. As if on cue, a notification popped up from our team chat. Tim had updated his profile. His name now read, Tim Brewer, he/him, Allie. I stared at the screen, feeling a level of impotent rage I hadn't experienced in years. This was no longer just an annoying job. It had become a battle of wills. I couldn't just quit. I needed the job, but I couldn't just roll over and accept this. My mind was racing. What could I do? What could any of us do? We were trapped. She had all the power. She had corporate policy and the entire HR industrial complex on her side. Any form of direct protest would be professional suicide. We'd be branded as bigots and fired before we could even pack our desks. I leaned back in my chair, feeling utterly defeated. Then, my computer's chat program pinged. It was a private message from Raymond. Come to the sanctuary. We need to talk. I walked over to the server room, my footsteps echoing slightly in the unnaturally quiet office. The air was thick with tension. Everyone was at their desk, staring at their screens, probably contemplating the same thing I was, surrender or annihilation. I pushed open the heavy door to the sanctuary. The blast of cold air hit me first, followed by the low, constant hum of the server racks. Raymond was sitting in his throne, a worn-out gaming chair, bathed in the blue glow of his multiple monitors. An open can of some neon green energy drink sat sweating on a stack of old hard drives. He didn't turn around. He just pointed to a rickety stool he kept for visitors. I sat down, the silent stretch for a moment, broken only by the fans. So, he finally said, his eyes still glued to a screen filled with scrolling code. The Queen has issued her decree. I told him I was at a loss. I explained how I saw no way out of this. Any pushback would be career suicide. We'd be painted as troublemakers and probably fired for creating a hostile work environment. Raymond took a long sip of his drink, then slowly swiveled his chair to face me. For the first time that day, I saw a glint in his eyes. It wasn't despair. It was the look of a man who enjoys a complex problem. You're thinking like a pawn, Ian, he said. You're thinking about how to fight her rules. That's a losing game. The trick is not to break the rules, but to follow them so perfectly that they break her. I must have looked confused because he leaned forward. It's a concept from the old internet forums, malicious compliance. He laid it out for me. The logic was so simple, so elegant. It was beautiful. Heather's power came from her rigid, unassailable moral high ground. She had built a fortress of corporate buzzwords and HR policies. Attacking it head-on was impossible. But every fortress has a flaw. Hers was hypocrisy. She demanded we state our pronouns to respect personal identity. The unspoken assumption was that we'd all use the standard, boring ones she put on the whiteboard, but the policy didn't say we had to. Her entire ideology was based on the premise that a person's self-declared identity is sacred and must be accepted without question. If we declared our identities, she would be forced to accept them. If she questioned our choices, she would be guilty of the very crime she accused everyone else of, invalidating someone's identity. She'd be a hypocrite. The weapon she had designed to control us could be used to disarm her completely. She wants us to play her game, Raymond finished, a slow grin spreading across his face. So, we're going to play. We're going to play it harder than she ever imagined. A spark of hope ignited in my chest. He was right. It was brilliant. It was risky, but it was the only move we had. We spent the next half hour brainstorming. We needed something that was absurd but not overtly offensive. Something that sounded just ridiculous enough to be deniable. I decided on mine first. It felt right. A little bit of old-world mockery for her new-world tyranny. Raymond chose his with a quiet, evil satisfaction. The next step was crucial. This couldn't just be the two of us. It had to be a movement, a quiet, grassroots rebellion, We had to pick our first allies carefully. We started with Dave, a guy from the analytics team. He was a military veteran, a no-nonsense guy who had been openly complaining about Heather's workshop since day one. I sent him a message. "Got a minute? Meet us in the back stairwell." He showed up a few minutes later, looking wary. Raymond laid out the plan. Dave listened, his expression unreadable. When Raymond finished, Dave was silent for a long moment. Then he broke into a wide grin. "I'm in," he said. "Count me in." Next was the big test, Sarah. She wasn't a complainer, she kept to herself. But we knew Heather's open office plan and constant interruptions were killing her productivity and stressing her out. She represented the silent, competent majority who just wanted to be left alone. If we could get her on board, we knew the idea had merit beyond just a few disgruntled guys. I walked over to her desk. She had her headphones on, her eyes locked on a complex design she was working on. I gently tapped her shoulder. She jumped, startled. She pulled one side of her headphones off, looking annoyed at the interruption. "Sorry to bother you, Sarah," I started, "but a few of us are planning a coordinated response to the new email policy. It's a bit unconventional. Are you interested?" I explained the plan of malicious compliance. I watched her face carefully. Her expression shifted from annoyance to curiosity, and then to a subtle, almost imperceptible amusement. A tiny smile played on her lips. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered, "I'll do it." That was it. The rebellion was real. We spent the next hour quietly spreading the word. We messaged people we trusted, one by one. The response was overwhelming. It was like opening a floodgate. All the resentment and frustration that had been building for months finally had an outlet. Not everyone agreed. A few were too scared, which was understandable. They just wanted to keep their heads down. We told them that was fine, no pressure. By lunchtime, about half the department was in on the plan. It was time to fire the first shot. I went back to my desk, my heart pounding. I opened up my email settings. With a deep breath, I typed it in. Ian Miller, Senior Analyst Pronouns. His Majesty / His Lordship. I hit save. A wave of adrenaline and fear washed over me. There was no going back now. A moment later, a department-wide email went out from Raymond. The subject line was Server Maintenance Update. I opened it. It was a standard IT notification, but at the bottom, there was his new signature. Raymond Lee, IT Systems Administrator, Pronouns, Master / Overlord. A beautiful, glorious act of defiance. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then, the notification started. Dave from Analytics updated his profile. His pronouns were now Captain / Captains. A woman in accounting changed hers to Your Excellency / Her Excellencies. Sarah, true to her subtle nature, updated hers to Faye / Fair. It was perfect. Just nerdy and obscure enough to be plausible. The dominoes began to fall, one by one. The Chosen Ones / The Chosen Ones. The Grand Poobah / The Grand Poobahs. Apex / Predator. One of the younger guys in marketing, a known robot enthusiast, changed his to Beep / Boop. The team chat, which had been a ghost town, slowly flickered to life. It started with work-related questions, but now they were phrased according to the new reality. Quick question for Captain. Does His Majesty have the final numbers for that report? Affirmative. I sent them to Master's inbox an hour ago. The office suck-up Tim was completely silent. His he/him, alley signature now looked painfully out of place. A monument to his failed attempt to curry favor. The atmosphere in the office had transformed. The tension was still there, but it was different. It was no longer the oppressive dread of before. It was the electric, giggling tension of a classroom prank in progress. People were trying so hard not to laugh. You'd see someone staring at their screen, their shoulders shaking silently. We were all waiting for Heather to notice. It took her about an hour. We knew she'd seen it when we heard a sharp, frustrated noise come from her glass-walled office. She stood up and paced back and forth for a few minutes, her hands on her hips. Then, she marched out of her office and strode directly to my desk. The whole office went quiet. Everyone was watching. "Ian," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "what is the meaning of this?" She pointed a trembling finger at my monitor, where my signature was displayed in an email. I took a breath and looked up at her, trying to keep my face as neutral as possible. The meaning of what, Heather? I asked innocently. Your signature, she hissed. His Majesty? What is that supposed to be? I adopted a slightly hurt expression. Those are my pronouns, Heather. I thought the new policy was to encourage us to share our authentic selves. Her face went through about 5 different emotions at once. Confusion, rage, disbelief. That's not a pronoun, she sputtered. It is to me, I said calmly. It's how I identify. I thought the whole point of this was that we don't get to question how other people identify. I had her. I had used her own logic against her, and she knew it. She stood there, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. She couldn't punish me. She couldn't even reprimand me. If she did, she would be proving that the entire policy was a sham. It was never about identity. It was about control. Finally, she just turned on her heel and stormed over to Raymond's server room. We all watched. This was the main event. She flung the door open. We couldn't hear what was being said, but we could see her through the small window in the door, gesticulating wildly. Raymond just sat in his chair, not even looking at her. We could see him occasionally shrugging. After about 5 minutes, she came stomping back out, her face the color of a ripe tomato. She slammed the server room door shut. She marched back to her office without looking at anyone and slammed her own door. A collective silent cheer went through the office. We had won the first battle. The rest of the afternoon was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. Work had to continue. Emails had to be sent. And the new rule had to be followed by everyone, including Heather. Around 4 p.m., she sent out an email about an upcoming project meeting. She had clearly tried to avoid it, but she had no choice. She had to address some of us directly. The email read, I am scheduling a meeting for tomorrow. I need Ian and Raymond and Sarah to be there. She had just used our names, but in our new system, that was misgendering. Raymond replied to all a minute later. Heather, I'm happy to attend, but in the future, please use my correct pronouns. I find it disrespectful to be referred to simply by my name. As the policy states, this is crucial for psychological safety. Thank you. Master Raymond, it was a checkmate, a public one. The entire department saw it. Heather was trapped, completely and utterly trapped in the cage she had built for us. A few moments later, a corrected email appeared in our inboxes. It was from Heather. Her tone was dripping with barely concealed fury. Correction, I am scheduling a meeting for tomorrow. I need His Majesty, and Master, and Faye to be there. The office erupted in silent, joyous victory. The next day, the chaos deepened. The morning meeting was a masterclass in absurdity. Heather stood at the front of the room, looking like she hadn't slept all night. Good morning, she said through clenched teeth. Let's start with project updates. Captain, how are we doing on the marketing analytics? Dave stood up, cleared his throat, and gave his update in a perfectly professional tone, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. It went on like that for an hour. Every interaction was a bizarre dance of corporate procedure and farcical titles. Your Excellency, has the finance report been approved? Yes, the chosen one has it now. Productivity ground to a halt. A simple 5-minute conversation now took 15, as people navigated the linguistic minefield. You could see the toll it was taking on Heather. Her forced smile grew tighter and tighter. Her eyes started to twitch. She was losing control, and she knew it, but she was too proud and too invested in her ideology to admit defeat. She doubled down. She started sending out articles about the importance of neo-pronouns, trying to pretend that this was the outcome she had wanted all along. It was a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative, but it only made her look more foolish. We were living in a state of passive-aggressive Cold War. The work was still, technically, getting done, but the entire social fabric of the office had been replaced with this absurd new system. And then, things escalated. We got a new project, a big one. It was for one of our oldest and most important clients, a massive, very conservative manufacturing company from the Midwest. Their CEO was a legendary old-school businessman who did not have time for nonsense. Heather announced the project in a team meeting, emphasizing how critical it was. This is our top priority for the next quarter. There is no room for error. We need to be professional and efficient. She assigned the core team, me as the lead analyst, Raymond handling the technical integration, and Sarah for all the design and branding work, the 3 of us. His Majesty, the Master, and Faye. We were now the public-facing team for a multi-million-dollar project, reporting to a client who probably thought HR was just a typo. I looked over at Raymond. He caught my eye and gave me a very, very slow wink. The stage was set. The final act was about to begin. The first few days of the new project were an internal nightmare. We tried to keep the absurdity confined to our own team, but it was impossible. Every internal email, every project management ticket, every chat message was a monument to our new reality. Master requests that His Majesty review the attached data before Faye can finalize the branding mock-ups. It was like running a Fortune 500 company using the rules of a fantasy role-playing game. Heather was the project overseer, which meant she was forced to participate. She was the unwilling dungeon master of our corporate D&D campaign. Her project update emails to senior management were works of art. She would contort her sentences into pretzels, trying to avoid using our pronouns. But Raymond had made it clear that not using them was a violation of policy. So she would bury them in corporate jargon. Synergistic alignment has been achieved by key stakeholders, His Majesty Master Faye, on the initial project deliverables. We all knew this couldn't last. The internal chaos was one thing, but this project required direct communication with the client. The inevitable moment arrived about a week into the project. We had a deliverable that needed client approval. It was a preliminary report that I had prepared. Heather called me, Raymond, and Sarah into her office. This was the first time she'd spoken to us as a group in private since the rebellion began. She looked exhausted. The righteous fire in her eyes had been replaced by a dim flicker of desperation. "Okay," she said, skipping any pleasantries. "We need to send this report to Mr. Davis at Sterling Manufacturing." Mr. Davis, the CEO, the big man himself. "We need to be careful," she said, choosing her words with extreme caution. "The external perception of our company must remain professional." Raymond leaned back in his chair, a picture of pure innocence. "Of course, Heather. Professionalism is key. We should make sure we follow all company communication policies to the letter, right?" Heather's eyes started twitching again. "Yes, Raymond, but perhaps, for external emails, we could temporarily revert to a more standard format." It was the moment we'd been waiting for. She was asking us to break her own sacred rule. "I'm not sure I understand," I said, my face a mask of confusion. "Are you asking us to misrepresent our identities to a client? That feels deeply unethical. It's like asking us to go back in the closet. I wouldn't feel psychologically safe doing that." I used her own weaponized vocabulary against her. Every buzzword was a bullet. Sarah, who had been silent, chimed in softly. "She's right, Ian. My identity is not something I can just turn on and off for a client. It's who Faye is." Heather was cornered. She looked from me to Raymond to Sarah, her face a mixture of fury and helplessness. She knew we had her. If she forced us to use standard signatures, we could file an HR complaint against her for creating a discriminatory and hostile environment. If she let us use our real signatures, she knew it would lead to disaster. She had to choose between two different flavors of career-ending poison. She finally slumped in her chair, defeated. "Fine," she muttered. "Just send the email." We left her office. The three of us walked back to our desks without saying a word. But the shared sense of victory was palpable. The task of sending the email fell to me. I drafted it carefully. The body of the email was perfectly professional. It was concise, clear, and attached the report, as promised. Then I added the signature. Ian Miller, Senior Analyst, Pronouns. His Majesty / His Lordship. I hit send. The email shot out into the ether. A digital time bomb on its way to the inbox of a very serious, very powerful man. And then we waited. For the rest of the day, an eerie calm settled over the office. Everyone knew what had happened. The fate of our department, and of Heather, now rested in the hands of Mr. Davis. The next morning, I came into work expecting to see the mushroom cloud. But there was nothing. No angry emails, no panicked calls. Maybe he hadn't seen it. Maybe his assistant handled it. The quiet continued through lunch. Heather stayed in her office with the door closed. Just as we were starting to think we'd gotten away with it, a man in a very expensive suit walked into our department. He wasn't from our building. He had the unmistakable aura of corporate with a capital C. He strode through the open plan office like a shark gliding through a fish tank. He was followed by our site's HR director, who looked incredibly nervous. The man in the suit was Mr. Sterling, the vice president of our entire division, the big boss. The guy whose name you only heard in hushed, reverent tones. He didn't say a word to anyone. He walked straight to Heather's office and knocked once before entering. He left the HR director standing outside like a sentry. He closed the door. The entire office held its breath. You could hear keyboards clicking to a stop. No one was even pretending to work. We were all just watching that closed door. We couldn't hear anything for about 10 minutes. Then the door opened. Mr. Sterling walked out, his face like stone. He didn't look at any of us. He just walked out of the department, the HR director trailing nervously behind him. A moment later, Heather emerged from her office. She looked like she had seen a ghost. Her face was pale, her eyes were wide and unfocused. She was carrying her personal handbag. She walked to her desk, grabbed a small box of her belongings, a couple of framed pictures and a potted plant, and walked towards the exit without making eye contact with anyone. She was gone, just like that. The silence in the office was absolute. Then, about an hour later, we all got an email from Mr. Sterling. The subject was, "A return to professional standards." The email was short and brutal. It stated that Heather was no longer with the company. It announced an immediate and total rescission of the recent departmental communications policy. It ended with a single, beautiful sentence. "Your email signature will contain your name, your job title, and nothing else. Your focus is to be on your work and on serving our clients with excellence. No exceptions." A quiet cheer spread through the office. It was a ripple at first, then a wave. People were smiling for the first time in months. I opened my email settings and deleted the line about my pronouns. It felt like taking off a heavy, ridiculous costume. The spell was broken. That afternoon, I walked over to the sanctuary. Raymond was leaning back in his chair, looking at his monitor. He was deleting his own signature. "So," I said, "we did it." He swiveled around, a rare, genuine smile on his face. Never underestimate the power of following the rules to the letter. He held up his energy drink. "To malicious compliance." "To malicious compliance," I said. The aftermath was surprisingly smooth. Corporate sent in a temporary manager, a guy from another department. He was like Mr. Henderson 2.0. His only concern was getting our numbers back up. The office quickly returned to its old, productive, and blessedly boring rhythm. The open plan office stayed, unfortunately. You can't win them all. But the oppressive atmosphere was gone. People started joking with each other again. The invisible wall of fear had crumbled. We never found out exactly what Mr. Davis said to Mr. Sterling, but we could piece it together. Apparently, he got my email and was so utterly bewildered by the signature that he called Mr. Sterling directly, a man he'd known for 20 years. The conversation probably started with, "What the hell kind of circus are you people running over there?" Mr. Sterling, a man who cared about profit and professionalism above all else, investigated. He found the months of bizarre mandatory trainings, the plummeting productivity, and our glorious coordinated rebellion. He didn't see an inclusive workplace. He saw a department in flames, led by an ideological zealot who was actively costing the company money and jeopardizing a multi-million-dollar account. The decision to fire her was probably the easiest one he made all year. The story of our little rebellion became a quiet office legend. The new employees who came in later would sometimes hear whispers about the pronoun wars. Life went on. I still stare at spreadsheets. The coffee is still mediocre. But we won. We didn't do it by shouting or protesting. We did it by taking a stupid authoritarian rule and following it until it collapsed under the weight of its own absurdity. We just wanted to be left alone to do our jobs. And in the end, that's exactly what we got. Justice, served cold, the way it's meant to be.